don't be so worried about having to make everything so perfect, and don't be afraid to make a mistake. And some of the neatest moments come when you're scared and you're just watching and listening.
Hello and welcome to ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, founder and first baseman. If you've ever wanted to learn bass, but you think maybe you're too old or your body just won't cooperate or some other reason, you should know that right now there are thousands of people inside the For Bass Players Only community. A lot of them of the silver-aged vintage, and they are learning bass, having the time of their life playing music that they love. You should come join them and experience that incredible transformation for yourself. Because, as I always say, you're never too old to groove. So let's play bass. My guest this week is Harmoni Kelley. She has been described as a road warrior bassist and vocalist. She's from Austin, Texas, currently on tour with country music superstar Kenny Chesney. With over two decades of experience, both on tour and in the studio, Harmoni worked her way up, playing with Austin legends such as Fastball, James McMurtry, Slade Cleaves, and Bob Schneider, and cut her teeth with countless bands and artists of all musical genres before moving to Nashville, Tennessee in 2013. She's also played with Hank Jones Jr., Louise Mandrell. The list just goes on and on. Her time spent networking and gigging around Nashville would eventually culminate with a call to audition for Kenny Chesney back in 2014. These days, Harmoni splits her time between Austin and Nashville while continuing to tour and do session work when not on the road with Chesney. This is her first time on ForBassPlayersOnly.com. Welcome, Harmoni. Great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, John. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Did I get at least most of those facts right?
Yeah. The only one I want to make a change is it was Hank Williams Jr.
Oh
Uh,
my goodness. That's
and
okay.
I really only played one gig with him, but it was one of those things that sort of opened up some doors for me in Nashville, which was a town at the time in 2013 that I didn't really know a lot of people in. So yeah, so that was the only change. Everything else sounded great.
Well, you know what? A younger version of me would probably cut the thing and just start right over again. But you know what, folks? I'm human. Oops, there goes my credibility. I hope you'll all cut me some slack, especially you, Harmoni. So
You're good.
thank you. You've got a great story. Let's, if you don't mind, let's go back to the beginning. And I'd be interested in hearing you describe your musical upbringing and how you were initially exposed to music and what led you to become a bass player.
So my dad, um, I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, and that's kind of where my mom and dad met, and that's where our extended family lives. And so between there and a rural town in Northeast Texas was kind of where I grew up as a little kid. And my dad was always playing in bands around Shreveport. So he had a little music community there. So since I was born, my dad has always been playing, and he still plays occasionally, but not as much. And then they moved to Austin when I was young, when I was a kid. And so I had more of being surrounded by even more of a music town here. And then at some point, my dad, like they listened to great records. Like my dad has a great vinyl collection. And so I grew up in a house where the Beatles were being played all the time, and Little Feat and the band and Taj Mahal and, Willis Allen Ramsey, and like a lot of really kind of groovy rhythm and blues based, like rhythm section heavy kind of bands. And so all I can figure out is that maybe as a young age, like a young kid, my ear was kind of introduced to all this music that was, had a really heavy, deep pocket for bass and drums and B3 and all that stuff. And so I was really exposed to that kind of stuff at a young age. And then in high school, as everyone probably does, I went through a lot of different music phases. I was really into 90s country for a minute. And, so it's kind of woven through this musical listening journey. But then I landed in later high school, I landed in kind of a grunge. Before that, it was more of like a metal phase. And so my best friend in high school and I were really, really obsessed with one of the bands was Guns N' Roses. Huge fans in the 90s. And she, we would always kind of have this fantasy of like starting a band and, being like that, and so she was like, well, I'm going to get a guitar and you should get a bass and we'll start a band. And I was like, okay, it's great, and so I asked my dad my mom and dad for a bass for Christmas that year. I was 17 years old and they kind of looked at me like, are you sure? Like, that's the only thing. If that's what you want, that's all we can afford to get you for Christmas this year. And I was like, yep, this is what I want. And they went, okay, whatever. And my dad, I'd never asked him to teach me how to play. He was a guitar player. So he always played acoustic guitar, electric guitar, and songwriter and all that, singer. And I never asked him to teach me how to play. I wasn't really interested in learning how to play the guitar, but for some reason, bass really spoke to me. And I think it was Duff McKagan was kind of, he's the bass player for Guns N' Roses. And I think it was more of I saw him and I went, man, that guy is a rock star. And I want to do that. I want to do that. And so for some reason, that became my first kind of interest in wanting to play bass, even though me as a player, what I do doesn't really have a ton to do with the way that Duff plays, but he's still absolutely one of my heroes. And I really sort of nod to him always as being the person who kind of introduced me into that as an instrument, and I've met him before. He's the nicest human being in the world. And he has a really great story. And he's had quite the journey himself. But yeah, so I got a bass for Christmas and my friend and I never ended up starting a band, but it was one of those classic things where it was just the thought of starting a band was really cool. But I kind of stuck with it. And I remember sitting in my parents' living room and on the floor, and I would put on like records and CDs, and I would pick out the bass lines. I remember this Jayhawks record back I think it was like 90, whenever this record came out. It was in the 90s, but this one in particular called Hollywood Town Hall. And it was Mark Perlman's the bass player for that band, and he's a lovely bass player, but the bass lines were very accessible for me as a new player. Like I could hear them. My ear, I think, was already able to pick out bass lines. It was always kind of the first thing that I was able to hear when I'd listened to music, which I don't know why. But so when I sat to teach myself how to play, I would just sit on the floor and kind of pick out. I didn't really know the notes I was playing, but I'm a very visual learner. And then at some point, my dad got me like one of those Mel Bay classic, like learn to play bass books.
Yeah.
So I took that home and I was like, well, I can't read music. I took some choir in middle school or whatever, but none of that really stuck with me. And so, but there was a section in the middle of the book where you opened up the 2 pages and it was a picture of the whole fretboard of the bass. And it showed where what were the open strings on a 4-string, and then where did all the notes occur up and down the neck. And so my, 17-year-old brilliant mind went, I can do something with this. And so my mom we had like a craft room, and she was very into crafts and sewing and all that stuff. So I went and got all these different colored construction paper pieces, and I cut out these tiny little squares in all the different colors. And so I decided that I think E was blue, G was pink, A was red. And so I cut out all these.
You are a visual learner.
Very much a visual learner. And I taped them all up and down the neck of the bass where all the notes occurred. And so I would start to visualize like all the A's, the red, like where are they? And then I was like, oh, and then I started to notice patterns. And I still see patterns when I play, today, but I'm less thinking about the note that I'm playing, but just the way that I know that it fits into the, I don't know, it's hard.
No,
You
the
player,
bass is the only instrument that's totally symmetrical because guitar is almost, but it's got that B
right?
string. You got the
That's
major third. The bass is consistent all the way up and down. That's great. While the other kids were putting baseball cards in the spokes of their bikes, you were putting little colored colored squares on your bass so you could. I think that's great.
it worked for me. I don't know. I'm not, I never, people ask me this all the time. I didn't go to school for music. I feel like I kind of got a late start. Well, not necessarily. I mean, your intro was perfect because I think encouraging people at any age to pick up an instrument is awesome because even at 17, when I got in my 20s and started playing in bands, I was noticing that a lot of my friends had started to play piano or guitar when they were like 8, and I was like, I'm just not there, and so I still deal with some pretty crushing imposter syndrome, as I'm sure all of us creatives do. But yeah, I taught myself how to play. I never went to school for music. I never took lessons. I took one lesson from my friend Lonnie Trevino, who's a fantastic bass player, because I was playing in a band and there was a song where I had to play slap bass, and I really didn't know how to do that. And so he kind of taught me the method of like, here's kind of where you place your hands, and here's kind of the idea behind it. But that was really the only bass lesson to this day that I think I've ever taken. But I'm an ear player. I think a lot of it used to make me feel like there was something I didn't know because there were all these people that went to Berkeley and University of North Texas and Denton, and they studied music and they were very schooled with theory. And
I almost went there.
man, they're great school. Both of those are great
Yeah.
schools, and I have friends
My
that
son
are.
went to Berkeley.
Oh, it's a lovely school. My dear friend Rachel Loy also went to Berkeley, and she's a fantastic player, producer, songwriter, all the things. But I
I have a
just
couple of questions for you
yeah,
before we get too far about a couple of things that you said. First of all, you were talking about how you just the bass is the first thing that you hear when you listen to a recording. Was that before or after? I mean, it you made it sound so matter of fact. Your friend in high school said, "Okay, I'll get a guitar, you get a bass," and you said, okay. I mean, was that because you were hearing it, or did that not happen until after she was she responsible for the way you listen to music and pick out
yeah.
the bass?
I don't really know. I think, it was like the music, the type of music that my parents were listening to, maybe as a young kid, like because he was listening to the Beatles and Little Feat and the band and all this stuff with great bass players and great melodic bass lines, like maybe in a way my ear started to hear that more. And so when I finally picked up a bass, it made sense for me when I went to learn it. But I don't really know. I mean, she was definitely, my friend Robin was definitely the reason why, I went, let's go get a bass, but I don't make.
Are you still friends with her?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
You say, look at me now, Robin.
Oh man, she thinks it's so cool. And she's an
Ooh,
artist, creative, more visually, but she never kind of pursued music in that way. So, but it is really cool to go, wow, I mean, now I should change my bio. It's almost been 30 years since I've kind of been playing, but really in my 20s, I started to kind of understand what it was like to be in a band and like the snowball effect of like you play with this one group and this drummer and then it goes so well that that drummer recommends you for another gig and then those people get exposed to you and then you get calls and I mean that just ended up happening for me kind of in my 20s and it's still happening. I get called when I'm home. When I'm not on tour with Kenny. I love to play so much that I had a gig Sunday. I had a gig Saturday. I had a gig. I have a gig tomorrow night for. We have this Health Alliance for Austin musicians, which is it's Ham, and so tomorrow's our big fundraiser day. So I'm playing for that with another band, and then playing this Friday and Saturday with another band, and
that's
I
great.
I love it. I mean, I could, if I wanted to, I could just come home from tour and just kind of be and sit still and, do yoga and read books and, do all the things, but which I do all those. But I love to play so much that I crave it. So
There is a foundation in Austin that I was talking to a couple years ago. It's called Musician Treatment Foundation.
I've heard of that. Yeah. 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 I've heard of
And
this.
Elvis Costello was on the board, and Bob Woodruff from ABC News, and trying to think who else. But they who did they bring in? I think it was Elvis. A couple of years ago, they invited me to come down. And Austin, I remember watching Austin City Limits. Actually,
Yeah.
it's still on. I still see it from time to
It's
time.
it's still on. I was actually so lucky to play on Austin City Limits when it's moved the original studio, which was on the UT campus. I played there with Bob Schneider probably in 2009 or 10 or something. And so we got to still do, it was one of the last shows that they did of Austin City Limits at that old studio. And they've since moved. They still do it. It's just in a new location at the ACL Moody theater or something like that. But
Cross
yeah,
paths with Roscoe Beck. Is he still in there?
yes, I love Roscoe. I'm a big fan.
Great guy.
Yeah, he's a legend. My gosh,
Yeah,
he's
I interviewed him, I don't know, a couple of years ago. First thing he says is, "Oh, I've got one of your books or some of your books." I said, "Wow, what an
oh,
honor!"
that's so cool. That's
He's a great
great.
guy. There was another question I wanted to ask. I don't know if I'm getting into a touchy area or not, but it sounded like your parents had some hesitation when you asked for a bass, and I was just wondering if some of that might have been girls don't play the bass. Was there any of that there, or am I just getting myself into trouble here?
No, no, no. I don't think it was. I think it was more that maybe. I mean, yeah. I mean, bass is not the instrument that most women gravitate to as their first instrument. I think there's a lot of women out there who, play other things and then they pick up the bass, but they have already had a background in playing guitar or keys or whatever. But it's the only thing I've ever wanted to play. It's still to this day. I have an acoustic, a lovely Takamine sitting over there that I'm not a very skilled guitar player, which is funny because I meet people all the time that I think because the word guitar is in bass guitar that they just make this assumption that you play guitar, and I'm like, the bass is a completely different instrument. I know it has strings and I know the word guitar is there, but I really think of the bass as more of a percussive instrument and sort of the realm of like the drums, the way that I play can be kind of percussive too, in an interesting way. I don't know that I'm doing it, but I did a session the other day with a drummer friend, and he was like, "You're doing all those little ghost pickup notes thing, and you're kind of muting with your hand." He's like, "What? Where are you doing that on what? What?" I was like, I don't even know that I'm doing it, to be honest, but like he's watching my fingers while I'm like, we're recording the song or we're doing a pass. And then he's like, are you doing that one thing with the middle finger or with this finger? And I was like, John, I'm not even like thinking about it as it's happening. I'm just I'm just playing, like, so.
That's funny.
I don't know I don't think my parents thought, girls don't play bass or that's sort of unusual. I think at that time it was like, I'm a high school girl, and most high school girls are wanting for their 17th year for Christmas clothes or,
Or a
you know,
car.
jewelry, or yes, I have my license. So perhaps maybe I need a car soon, or, what, like new pair of shoes or something. But so I think that was where the surprise came from more, was that they were like, okay. I mean, that's all you're going to be able to get. You realize that. And I was like, yeah, okay. So I
Well,
think that is
another
really,
thing I think is really cool. I've interviewed coming up pretty close to 900 bass players now, and
gosh.
almost everyone took up the bass because they really wanted to play guitar. And
Mhm.
oh, we already have plenty of guitar players, but you can play. That was my story. You can play bass, you can play guitar and not be in the band, or you could play bass and be in the band. So that was my story. So there are a handful of people that just went straight to the bass, like you, and I think that's very cool. But it is a little unusual.
I think most people that I know who play the bass have that story. That's a very common story where I hear like, well, we're forming a band And we already have two guitar players. I know you play guitar, but why don't you just pick up the bass? And it's like, okay, so, but I really, and I'm grateful and I kind of thank myself because what I didn't realize, and I always tell people this, like if there's girls or young kids, girls, boys, whatever, learning to play bass, I'm like, do that because what you don't realize now is that if you want to pursue this as a career, if you actually really enjoy it, playing bass is such a valuable instrument to have it. And if you can sing harmony vocals and you
Yeah.
can play bass really well, like you'll get work all the time. If you play guitar, I mean, not that you won't get work, and everybody's got their own flavor and style, and somebody might be looking for this thing, and you fit the bill. But there's in Nashville and Austin in particular, there's so many guitar players, and I think sometimes it can be a struggle to find work because there's a lot of them out there. So but yeah, bass players not so much. And if you can sing, that's a bonus. So that's been super
I
helpful.
could sing, but not in public. Um, you mentioned Duff McKagan. Who were some of your other bass player influences when you first discovered the instrument?
What's funny is that for whatever reason, maybe there aren't a lot of them, or there weren't at the time. But I've thought about this a lot, and I think it's changing. But when I was a kid and when I was first starting to play bass, there weren't a ton of female bass player role model, or there weren't as many. Um, and so all of the people that I was kind of looking up to or seeing were all men, but I didn't really even think anything of that. But some of my favorites, and then as I got more kind of in tune with the instrument itself and really started to pick that out and listen to that in different recordings, I really like Pino Palladino is one of my favorite bass players. I love his tone, and especially I heard him maybe for the first time. I'm a big R&B hip hop fan, and so I heard him on this D'Angelo record, and I was like, who is that? Who's playing that? And then when I looked up who it was in the liner notes and I looked up his picture, I was like, that does not match with the person that I thought it was. Like, it's this tall Welsh, white guy with curly hair, and like he's just so behind the like groovy pocket. He's always been one of my favorites. James Jamerson, I'm a big Motown fan, so that, and without even really knowing it, I actually play. I know they called him the Cook back in the day, but I play a lot with just this finger. And I
The
know
hook or the
that was
claw? I can't remember. Who was it?
the Cook or the Claw. I can't remember. Yeah. And then one of my favorite bass players who I'm actually kind of randomly on a text thread with, because we have a big like 25-person bass player thread, mostly LA cats. But Tim LaFave's on there. My friend Eva Gardner's on there, who plays with Pink.
I've interviewed both of them.
She's one of my favorite people on the
What a
planet.
story! Hanging out with John Entwistle growing up with
Yeah, yeah. Justin Meldal Johnson is on this text,
Okay.
which is so wild to be kind of one of his, like, I don't know, acquaintances and work kind of colleagues. Like we're contemporaries in that way. But like
He's kind of more of a producer than a bass player, isn't it? And he kind of morph into that.
I think he shifted into that more. The first time I saw him play was probably, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe. He was out with Beck, and I went to see Beck here in Austin. And I remember I used to be, I don't know, I feel like maybe because of the way that I came upon the bass, I kind of had this idea of being like a bass purist. Like I was like, I play with my fingers and I don't use effects. And I just think a bass should sound like a bass, which is all. I'd stand by that for me. Like I love the tone of the bass. Like why would I want it to be anything else? But I went to see Beck and I watched Justin Meldal Johnson, and I realized that everything he would play with his thumb and palm mute, or he would play with a pick, or he would have a bass with flat rounds and a bass with round wounds. He would play with different kind of effects pedals at different moments, but everything that he was doing was exactly right for the song. And that's what I realized. And he totally changed my whole perspective, I guess, in that way, because I was like, wow, he's doing all the things, but he's not overdoing it. And he's not doing it in every part of every song. It's like it's so perfectly placed, it's amazing. It's totally changed my view on all of that. So
That
he's one of my
sounds like musical maturity also.
yes, very much so. Very much so.
So you talked a little bit, you touched on playing with somebody and then them recommending you and them kind of snowballs there. Was there a defining moment from just playing bass in high school and going beyond that and to going pro and doing what you do now?
Well, I think one of the main moments that started to happen, I got a gig, the same drummer that I did a session with recently. He and I have been friends for, I don't know, 25 years or something. And he's one of my favorite drummers to play with here in Austin. And he and I had done some gig with a singer-songwriter, and it was my first time playing with him and meeting him. And that particular gig didn't last for a long time, but the relationship that we built from just playing that one gig has lasted for up until now, and continues to last. And it was what he's more of a seasoned kind of pro here in Austin and plays with a lot of people. And he said, I mean, it was like from the moment we played the downbeat, it was like he kind of looked at me like, "Oh, okay, that's very interesting. You and I put the we have the pocket in the same place, and it's really hard to, this from playing with drummers. It's like when it really locks in and meshes, it's like one of the greatest feelings in the world. And you want to like replicate that again and again. And so he was just from that one gig, he called me to play with this guy, John D. Graham, who is really awesome singer songwriter, but was kind of in like the punk rock scene here in Austin back in like the 70s and 80s, but he does this residency at the Continental Club in Austin on Wednesdays. And so he said, I want to bring you in when he needs a sub to play bass. And at the time I was like so terrified because I was like, I don't, and I was always caught up in this world of like needing to know what was going on. And I want to have a set list and I want to have my notes, and I was so afraid of making a mistake, And so when I played that gig with John D. Graham, I had my little notes on the stage and I had just a couple little things, and he came over and he looked at me and he ripped my notes off the stage. And he was basically like, where we're going, you won't need those. And I was like, okay. But what he taught me was like one of the greatest lessons as a musician I learned from him. And that was like, don't be so worried about having to make everything so perfect, and don't be afraid to make a mistake. And some of the neatest moments come when you're scared and you're just watching and listening. And so I had to develop a really good ear and be able to watch his hands and like okay, I don't really play guitar, but like I'm starting to understand like what he's doing and when he's going to the 4, the 5, or the 6 minor, or the 2, or and he's going to play songs that I've never heard before on stage in front of an audience. And that's the most terrifying thing the first time you do it, maybe the first 10 times you do it, but it really taught me to start being okay with being spontaneous and letting go of expectations and just being in the moment with the song and listening, and so that just kind of opened up this whole new world, and people started to see me play with him. And then I got called to play with the Fastball guys on one of their solo projects. And then I got called to play with James McMurtry, and like I got called to sing on one of his records. And then at some point Bob Schneider called me and said, I'm looking for a bass player. And at the time, Bob, I mean, he's always been kind of one of Austin's darlings. He's kind of the well-known local guy, but yeah, it just kind of became this thing. And I think that, I don't ever want to define myself as a female bass player, but I do think that there's a lot of because it's more unusual to see a woman on bass. I think you get noticed more, and there is something about, I can sing certain kind of harmonies that maybe a lot of men can't, because of the range or whatever. So there's there's definitely value in being a female bass player, for a lot of different reasons. But
Yeah. I love what you said a minute ago also about listening and 1625 or whatever it is. There are only so many places a chord progression can go. And like except in a Steely Dan song. That's a category all
yeah, that's a different level.
but that's a lot of what I teach in my courses and in my membership and ear training and get used to what does it sound like when you first of all learn 1, 4, and 5. Chances are those three chords are in there somewhere. So start there and then go to the sixth and there's flat sevens and whatever. But no, I that's a great story how you hey, I was curious. Did was George Porter ever George Porter Jr. was he ever on your radar in the
He
meters?
wasn't as a young player, but of course now I very much admire
You
him.
mentioned Shreveport and Louisiana and down south. So I did get to interview him a few years ago at
Oh,
a bass player.
how great. That's
Uh,
great.
Talk to me a little bit about Kenny Chesney and that gig. What's that like?
Oh my gosh. It is I had never I feel like when I got this gig 10 years ago, I have played a lot of at that point in my life 10 years ago, I'd played a lot of festivals. I'd played a lot of, you know, theaters or large club gigs, like especially with Bob Schneider, we'd go to New York and play like the Bowery Ballroom, and there's 1,000 people there. Or we'd play ACL Fest and, there'd be however many thousands of people there. So I had sort of gotten used to playing in front of a lot of people, but I was still very much wasn't like a showboaty bass player. I was always kind of like stand back by the drums, maybe I have a vocal mic, but I'm here in a supportive role, And I got this call to audition for Kenny, and then I ended up getting the gig. And the band leader said, I I know you've been doing this for a long time, and I know you've played a lot of really great big gigs, but this is going to be a little bit different in the size of crowds, which I was already kind of knew. But he said that you're going to be. He wants you to have your personality. He wants you to. You're going to be wireless. You're going to have in ears in. He wants you to go out and run around and do and do a thing and just kind of make it. You're a part of the show now. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, yeah. And it was the first time I stepped off of like we have this a physical set where there's different levels and the drummer's over here and the keyboard player's over here and I'm kind of down here and there's steps and all this stuff. And the first time, even just in rehearsals in the production room, when I stepped off of that set and went, okay, here I go, it's like it's a really just kind of nerve-wracking experience because I'd never really done that before, but then it's also like you don't realize what it means to play and keep track of where you are in the song and walk around, and do that whole thing while you're, it's kind of like patting your head and rubbing your stomach. Like you're not just standing in one place and playing bass and singing. You're now walking around, you're interacting with the guitar player, you're going down. We have this catwalk, this thrust that goes out into the audience, like, I don't even know, 30 feet. And then there's a T at the end where we can run back and forth. And so the first 30 minutes of the show is a song to song to song. There's no break pretty much in between that. And we're, going down there and there's like an AC/DC kind of guitar moment where we're all out front doing the thing. And it feels like home, and I'm more of kind of like a extroverted introvert, which is funny to say because people think when you are a musician or a performer that you must be an extrovert, which is absolutely not true. I'm very much more of an introverted person, but I think I approach this gig especially as if I am, it's kind of like acting, which I did some of in middle school and high school. Like it's theater, like I am able to, when the curtain comes down and I hear the walk on music go off, I get to become this other person. I get to step into this other woman's shoes and become her, which is interesting because when I get off stage, I leave that person kind of on stage. And I think a lot of people that are watching the show think that I'm just that person all the time. And I'm really kind of like, I have some social anxiety, and I have like, the stage is my safe place. I don't get stage fright. I really rarely, unless it's a radio show where they're like, red lights on, don't make a mistake. Like, oh, I don't really get nervous doing that, which is crazy to say. You're standing in front of 60,000 people at AT&T Stadium, but I'm fine. It's when I get off stage that I start to get that like, nervous kind of anxiety around that, because I
Interesting. I
don't get
guess
to act anymore. I'm me now.
that's interesting, and I guess it's not really all that uncommon. Comedians, they say a lot of them are like that. Johnny Carson, they said, was a very shy person. He didn't.
Wild to think about, but it makes sense. I mean, yeah.
Tell me about the audition itself, the music part of it. I'm sure that was a pretty major component of the experience too. Did you walk in there? I assume you went in there knowing the book, the music, and knowing what to play, having some idea what to expect. But what was that like?
Yeah, I knew I was going to be auditioning, and I think there were, not at the same time, obviously I didn't run into anybody, but I think they auditioned me, and then they auditioned maybe 4 or 5 other bass players that came, and there's this rehearsal space in Nashville called Soundcheck. And so they had, and originally, and I think the musical director, band leader, kind of knew the world that I was coming from, and he didn't want me to get nervous. And so he said, yeah, it's going to be really low key. It's just going to be the band. And, I was like, okay, great. And he sent me the 6 songs. And it was a mix of three. I think there were 3 songs that it was just bass on. And then the other 3, I actually had to sing on and learn the background vocal part. So I went in with I knew what I was learning, and I memorized it and all that. But what I did, what was interesting was that I've always been a 4-string bass player, like my upbringing all through my 20s. And then for this gig, I knew that there was a potential, because it's a very Nashville thing. It's also big in the gospel world. And a lot of players play 5-string, and that's very common in modern country, And so I listened to the songs that they sent me, and they were pretty heavy on that low B string. And so I was like, okay, well, nobody said you have to play 5-string for this gig. No one's ever told me that, in fact. But I thought, well, it's there in the songs. Maybe I need to dip my toe into this 5-string pond, for this gig. So I went and borrowed a 5-string from a friend of mine in Nashville, and just for a few weeks before, and I knew I was going to this audition, and I just kind of messed around, and it is so uncomfortable if you've been playing 4-string your whole life. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I got so nervous. And so I showed up to the audition. I went to SIR that morning and rented a 5-string, showed up to the audition as if I had always played 5-string, and as if that were mine and I owned it. And then we got there, and there were a whole crew of people, backline techs, monitor techs, the band, the production manager. And I was like, okay, wow, no one told me there was going to be like a whole host of people here watching this audition. So I walk in with a 5-string bass that I am not comfortable with. And then the monitor engineer, who's lovely, says, do you have your own in-ears? And I said, no, because I'd never been fitted for, and I mean, it's just, less of an Austin thing. It's more of a Nashville thing, a pop rock big scene, to have your own in-ears and be on that kind of system. And I went, no, I don't. And he went, it's okay. I have some generics. I'm going to give you, we'll test a couple out and see how they work. And so he gave me these. They have like a foam end, you squish it and stick, but the in-ear itself is pretty heavy. And so even with that in my, I have pretty small ears, it kept falling out. So everything about this audition, even though I'd spent so much time doing my homework and learning the songs and learning the parts, and they said, okay, Kenny's not going to be here today. We're gonna record it, videotape it. Everybody who's auditioning, we're going to send him the recordings, and then he's going to choose one person that he wants to come back in and audition with. So I went, okay. So now they're recording this on a tripod with me, and I've got this bass that's foreign, and I've got these, and they keep falling out, and I've got to sing, and everything about it. I, in my mind, went, I am definitely not getting this gig. Like it's all signs were pointing to this is a disaster. Like I can't even believe this is happening. And sure enough, I got the call about a week later from the MD, and he said, Kenny wants to meet you, and he wants to come in and rehearse, audition with you, and it'll be the same songs. And so now knowing him and knowing Kenny and knowing the way that this whole thing is, what I realized is that it's more about me. It's more about you. It's more about your vibe and how you groove with the band and what your general attitude is. And are you smiling? Are you scowling? Are you jiving with the rest of the band? Then she's missing notes, or these things keep falling out, or she looks nervous, or whatever. Like, he didn't care about any of that, because I think he knew, he's like, saw the potential, even though he knew that I was greener than any of the other guys that came into audition. I mean, in all honesty, like, I always think, like, there are probably a million bass players out there who are better bass players in terms of knowing all the notes and knowing all the theory. But that's not why I got chosen for this gig. I got chosen for this gig because I am me, and I am the right fit for this gig.
That's what I was thinking when I was listening to you. That they said, you know what, she's got it. She's the one. Yeah, we could work with her, but yeah, she's what we want.
It's more important. I was replacing somebody who had been in the band for 20 years, and I remember the MD calling me before the audition, and they wanted to meet me for lunch even before the audition. And he was like, it's almost more important than, can you play all the notes and whatever, like, is how can you meld with this thing, because it's a family, and we're going to be on a bus together. We're going to be on
You're
the
the
road.
only female in the band?
Yeah. So that was a whole thing too. It's like, these guys have been a band for, the newest member, I think, was Kenny Greenberg, and at the time, he had been in the band for 6 years.
But you were replacing a guy?
I was replacing a guy, a bass player.
I ran into Tanya O'Callahan at NAMM this year playing with Whitesnake.
Oh, wow.
I said, hey, Tanya, how you doing? I said, hey, so are those boys behaving themselves? And she goes, no.
Honestly, it's so great at this point. It's like, it really is kind of like family and siblings. And, I have a bunch of brothers and dads, and even with the crew, I mean, there's a handful of women, and it's grown now, like in the production and in the audio department and in the video department. Like, there's a woman and two women in audio, and there's one in the video department, and there's a few in the production office. So there are more of us out there, but there's never been another woman in this band. And we're on a bus together. Kenny has his own bus, and he flies a lot sometimes, but it's, it's me and the guys on the bus.
How many people are in the band in total?
There are 6 of us in the band, and then Chesney makes 7. So yeah. It's I don't even think about it really anymore. It's funny. And I think, being a woman, playing bass, you end up in situations for most of your playing life where you're the only female in the band, and so I wasn't too, it wasn't a foreign thing for me. I was like, oh yeah, this just feels like, every other gig I've done up into this point. It's like, I'm usually the only woman in the band. So yeah, it's great. They're awesome. I'm very lucky in so many ways,
Like,
so.
a good group of guys.
Yeah.
was also thinking about that time when you were talking about five strings on how they were so everywhere that there came a time where after all that the rave of playing a five string kind of died down. If you played a four string, you were kind of cool because everybody's playing the five string.
Yeah, it
But
sets you apart from that whole thing. Well,
yeah,
I come home, to Austin, and I mean, really on any other gig, I'm looking at my bass. I have a Fender P bass with flats. I think they're either labella. These are labellas, but I used to play Tomastic
yeah,
Infeld. I really enjoy the way that those strings
yeah.
feel. But that's my go-to. It's like a Fender P with flats on it, for most of the other gigs that I four string that I'm playing. So
They're
uh,
homage to James Jamerson.
what's that?
They're homage to James Jamerson.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
But
Exactly.
I also mentioned musical maturity, which I had lacked back in the 80s when I got my first job. And I'd be playing a wedding and I'd be like, way down where I didn't both. Hey, I got a five string. Hey, look at
I
me.
gotta play all the strings and all the notes and all the yeah, yeah, yeah. I get
Uh,
it.
I want to ask you, boy, you said you didn't study music in school. Obviously, you know an awful lot about it just listening to you talk and seeing your career. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, For Bass Players Only is really a bass instruction site. And I've got people from pretty much all 50 states now, and I don't know, 60, 70 countries around the world coming to For Bass Players Only every day to learn bass. And most of them are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. I've got students in their 80s, both men and women.
That's great. That makes me very happy.
It makes me happy too. And they're not looking to make a career out of music. Most of the time they want to play some classic rock riffs with their friends, or they want to, play some blues shuffles or some, maybe some walking bass or a little funk R&B. Some of them are into slapping, but they're not looking to tour the world playing sold out arenas to their adoring fans. They just want to have some fun. And a lot of times when we get into our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, things like arthritis and tendonitis and maybe recovering from surgery and those kinds of things. And I'm just telling you all this to give you a context because I want to ask you what advice you could impart to somebody like that who wants to learn to play bass. What should they be thinking about? What questions should they be asking? What kind of goals should they have? Anything like that.
I I've always been and I taught lessons for a minute, back in, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, but I realized so quickly that it was really hard for me to teach somebody bass because all I knew was you can't really teach how I learned except to say, hey, the best way for me, and not everybody maybe learns this way, but like I'm such a I want to, and it's easier to learn bass, I think, when you go in thinking like, I want to learn how to play that song, and that to me is like a digestible chunk of, that's all you have to do. I have to learn, I want to learn how to play bass for whatever this song is, and so you sit down and every day you listen to it and you've got your bass and you maybe like learn the verse, or maybe you learn the chorus. And then at some point at the end of the week, you can put it all together and you can play the whole thing through. To me, that's like really a fulfilling way to learn how to play bass. Other than I've never been, not to say that this is, I probably should, but I've never been a like sit at home and learn scales and just practice scales and like that's not exciting to me. And I think that's where a lot of people run into that trap of like, especially when you're younger or maybe have other things in life going on that like that's not fun for me. That's not exciting. And so that ends up getting boring. And then you end up putting the bass down or you look at the bass every day and go, I don't want to practice scales. So for me, it's like I get excited, and it's a manufactured way to play with a band, but like to sit down on your floor in your living room or in your office or whatever and pick a song and just hit play and just plug your bass into your amp. and start playing along. Like that to me is so, because then it feels like you're playing along with other people, you know. And I have this awesome, there's a million tools out there, but I have this old one I think that Boss made. And it's like it's basically, what is it, a T89 or it's something, and it's like
I have a Dr. Beat.
yeah, and it's like you can plug headphones in, you can plug your bass into one side, and then you can plug, you know, your phone or whatever your audio source is into the other side. You can mix it in such a way that like I can hear the music, and then I can, you know, kind of mix some of my bass in. And so then I'm like, I don't even need an amp. I mean, I take that with me on the road. So I'm sitting in a hotel room, you know, Kenny says, "Hey, we're going to do this song tomorrow night." I'm like, "Well, I'm in a hotel room with no amp. So now I have to like learn this song on the fly." But it's awesome for stuff like that. So I don't know. That's how I enjoy learning. But it's also just, it's supposed to be fun. You know, to me, it's like music is supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be this like trudged through mud and this anxiety producing thing, you know, not saying that I haven't had those moments where I'm getting ready for a gig and I'm like, I have 30 songs to learn in 2 days, but it's still supposed to be fun, you know? So,
I
um,
agree. I love that. I have two things to say. When students go and they log in and to my library or the stuff that I teach, my scales are not boring. They groove. And
see, that's cool.
you know how many videos I've seen of a bass teacher say, okay, now here's what I want you to do. They do these chromatic runs. Go like this. Da, 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 da. Good. Now go down. Da, 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 da. Now reverse it. Da, 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 da. No, no. Why can't that groove? If you want to play a chromatic run, you know what my chromatic grooves? They've got guitar and they've got drums. They
That's
go da,
great.
da, 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 do, 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 do,
That's a
do. The
way
same
clearer.
notes, but
Yeah,
it's music. And when you play scales, my scales groove. Everything grooves in my lessons because, you know, why not have it musically satisfying and rewarding and fun to play while you're still doing the same thing? Don't learn all your scales and modes just because they say you're supposed to. Do you know what you're supposed to do with all those notes in order to, you know, make music out of them? I get a little
that's
passionate
the thing.
about it, but I
You're
think
going to
we're on the
be
same page here.
Oh my God. Like that's going to be in like you're learning all the scales to, if your goal is to play music, then why not make this learning of the scales musical as well? You know, I mean, that's what your goal is in the end. You're not just, hopefully your goal isn't just to sit in a quiet room and play scales by yourself with no other instrument involved, you know? So
Some,
yeah,
some
I see you.
people do like that. Some people like to just sit in a room and study and learn bass by themselves, which surprised me a little bit at first. But hey, you know what? If that's what you want and that's what
Each
you
his own too. That's not my thing, but it's also who far be it for me to say how anybody should learn music. So I guess that's my takeaway is whatever works for you, that's what you should do. Go towards that. Lean into that thing. You know, it doesn't have to be my thing, and my thing doesn't have to be your thing. So whatever works for you,
right
embrace
on. And you made me think of something else too. For bass, you know, I've done a lot of stuff in the bass world, but when you say to play the song, I feel that way about the drums. There's one thing I've always wanted to play on the drums. You know that the Rare Earth song, "I Just Wanna
it.
Celebrate."
Yes. Yes.
There's a drum solo. I always wanted to play that on the drums. Someday I will.
Someday. I should
Someday.
learn it. I have it. That's the only other instrument that I feel comfortable playing is I bought a kit during COVID. I bought a little Gretsch Catalina club kit, and man, that's fun. And I honestly think learning drums is has potentially made me a better bass player. You know, like
Not
it's
surprised to hear that. Other people have said that. I think Brian Bromberg started as a drummer. I don't remember. Yeah, I think he did. Jocko played the drums.
that's awesome.
He's the drums on Teen Town on Heavy Weather album. Weather.
Wow.
Hey, tell me about your gear. You mentioned a few instruments, not your drums, but your go-to bass or basses. You know, basses, strings, amps, effects, things like that. Just the general stuff. What are you playing?
Yeah, I so I'm a Fender player. I mean, I do have this Music Man there, but I
You're slapping, right?
Yeah. But most of my basses are Fenders, and I have a jazz bass that I've had for 25 years, 20 some plus years. And I was like, I realized that as I was playing that, some friend of mine, fellow musician, saw me like roll off the tone knob, and he was like, you're rolling off the tone in such a way that it's almost like you want it to sound like a P bass. And I was like, whoa. And so I picked up the P bass and I went, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. So I'm mostly a P bass player, but yeah, I'm an Ampeg artist, and I love, to me, it's like Ampeg is so wonderful when it comes to like making a warm vintage bass sound. It's like that's what I enjoy. That's what I want my basses to sound like. So
You
um
deal with Dino Monoxylus over at Ampeg?
yes, he's my guy. He's my guy. Actually, he came to so we finished our tour in Foxborough at Gillette Stadium, and Dino lives up in Boston, and so he and his wife Rachel came down to one of the shows, and I was able to which they've done before, and I was able to kind of show him around. And Robert, our new front of house engineer as of 2 years ago, 2+ years ago, is a wizard by the name of Robert Scoville. And he was out with Tom Petty for about 25 years, and so he's been out with us for a little bit now. And he is my guru in terms of I've never had a sound man, a sound engineer, front of house engineer that has taken the time and care to really dig into making the bass sound great. And he was like, if the bass is wrong, it's the hardest instrument to mix, but once that's right, everything else falls into place. And so he and I have been working on, and this year he came up, we're calling it the War Wagon, but he spent the whole summer or spring before tour kind of creating this. I have this Ampeg flip top cabinet. It's like a PF which PF is it? I can't remember. But that it has tubes in it, and it's kind of mimicky of the B15, but not really.
As long as you
And
don't have to carry it, right?
I know. But
That was pretty heavy with the tubes.
he built an isolation with some baffling in the front, so they put that in. It's in a cart, and so the amp goes in, and then this baffling goes in front of it, and then he's got a Neumann and an SM59, which is not one that gets mentioned often. And then
Never
he's
heard of
got two tube Ampeg mic pre's, and then an Ampeg tube DI. And so and then we also use this Ampeg SGT DI, and they've got, between him and my bass tech Terry, who's also a wizard, we have spent a lot of time in rehearsal this year kind of honing in on the bass sound. And when you're on stage with first of all, I'm playing 5 string, so anytime I go to the low B, it can be problematic. And then we're playing sometimes indoor stadiums, sometimes outdoor stadiums, sometimes shed amphitheaters. It's just it's hard to make the bass pop out, especially when you have 3 guitar players that are sort of, and then a keyboard player who also plays B3. Like, we're all kind of living in a similar space. And so he's like, I got to make the bass, and there are moments when I wanted the bass to have kind of a little bit of growl and distortion, but it's like, how do we do that and not lose the low end? And so it's been a work in progress. And I think it's still kind of a work in progress. So I have a suspicion that the next time we get together, we'll continue to tweak it, So, but he's amazing, and he's one of the best out there. He's a legend. He did a lot of the Avid videos and tutorials. Like, all my Sound Buddy friends in Austin were like, "Oh my God, you get to work with Robert Scoville? He's like my hero." So we're grateful to have him, and he cares. He cares about the bass.
Don't let him go.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Dino is great too. Nobody doesn't like Dino.
No one will ever say that they don't like Dino. I mean, I don't if there's
I
a
interviewed him. Actually, it was at a summer NAMM show several years back, and he was telling me about his upbringing. I said, "Did you see the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding?" And he said, "I lived that movie."
it was my life. That's hilarious. Oh my gosh. He's
Uh,
one.
any pedals or effects or anything else is in your rig that's worth mentioning?
So we use that Ampeg SGTDI. And then I mean I'm not like a huge pedal effects person, especially for this gig. There's so much going on with instrumentation outside of my little bass world that it's almost like I just need to do the thing. I need to be the bass player. And I use this Ampeg makes this pedal called the liquefier that's kind of a chorusy, warbly thing. So I use that on one chorus of this song called Summertime. And then, you know, that's I've changed it up. A couple of years ago, I was using other pedals at different moments, but
You ever use
um,
a Sans amp?
I'm looking at one right now, actually. I have I I have this for my at home kind of stuff. But
Those are
those
awesome.
are amazing. They're amazing. Like, yeah, that's about the extent of my kind of pedal world would be me using like a Sans amp. I have a like a an MX. Sometimes this MXR gets used, this little bass overdrive, which these are pretty great in the world of bass overdrives because it still kind of gives you the low end. But yeah, the Sans amp is kind of a staple for
Yeah.
stuff like that. So
What
yeah.
about the future? Is there anything else that you've always wanted to do that you haven't done yet? Or is there anything else in the works that you didn't mention? Or is there a someday I'm gonna?
My plan is to, because I've always kind of toyed with the idea of writing songs and I've written some songs, but it's more for me, and I joined this songwriting game with some friends here in Austin, some other musicians. I think there are 45 of us in this particular group. And one of many, I don't know, Austin's got all kinds of different songwriting groups, but I joined this one a couple of years ago and I said yes. My friend Dave started it and he was like, "Do you want to participate in this?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I mean, I kind of write." He was like, "Okay." And so I wrote him back a month later and I said, "I'm saying yes." And it's a nervous yes. And he was like, "Those are the best yeses."
Oh,
And
you
so
know that firsthand, don't you?
oh my gosh. And so ever since that, when I did that 2 years ago, I realized that I really wanted to write songs in Logic Pro and kind of the stuff that I'm writing isn't because I don't play acoustic guitar and I'm not songwriting in that way. So what I'm doing is like coming up with a drum loop and then doing some synth, kind of stuff, and maybe grabbing an electric guitar and doing like a solo lead line and then stacking vocals. But the stuff that I'm writing is more of like kind of a Devo, Blondie, B-52s, kind of like mixed with like a little Taylor Swift kind of pop stuff. So I don't know. I keep thinking like maybe I should put out like an EP of some of this stuff and maybe have some of my friends in town who my friend Noelle Hampton is a really great producer and she's a songwriter and band leader herself, but I'm like, I think she would be a really great person for me to work with as a producer for this kind of pop stuff and maybe put out some singles or maybe do a whole record or so I don't know. That's kind of the thing that I'm considering
Sounds
getting
like you've been thinking about it, giving it some thought.
given it some thought. I'll have to get back to you on when that happens, and I'll send you I'll send you a link to it whenever it gets
I
finished.
encourage you, and you know what? I have to say this for myself once in a while. I would like to. I am planning on making a record because
There
I
you go.
have
Yes.
and I
See,
told you, I've interviewed a lot of bass players, and so many of them say, "Well, I've been a side man or a side woman for so many people, and I have enough of my stuff of my own, and I'd like to put out a record." Then they all say, "But it's not going to be one of those bass records. I hate bass records."
Like a solo bass. Yeah, I don't know. Mine,
Yeah.
mine definitely, it's funny, like on some of these songs, I'm not even playing real bass on. I'm just kind of like laying down these synthy little hook lines. So I'm like, wow, I'm not even playing bass on these songs that I'm writing, but it's kind of cool, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, go ahead. I encourage you, and I hope you'll encourage me also, and we'll get together
We'll
and
be
share.
accountability buddies
There
for
you
that
go. There you
one.
go. I have one last question for you, Harmony. If you can imagine, what would you be if you were not a bass player? Something outside of music.
I would, I mean, you mean like if I could go back and if I could snap my fingers and suddenly have a different career, like I think I would be a chef or something. I don't, it's hard for me to get outside the realm of like creative arts, because there is, to me, food is still creative and still in the realm of art and all that. So, yeah, I don't know. That's the first thing that came to my mind was a chef.
I
So,
get that answer a lot. It's funny. Tommy Stinson, who also played bass with Guns N' Roses, I asked him that question. Some people say, "Gee, I don't know," or a lot of people say a chef or something else. Tommy Stinson said, "I'd be a TV weatherman. Always wanted to be a TV weatherman."
that's so great. I would love to see Tommy Stinson as a TV weatherman. It would be so, so cool. That's awesome.
Yes, it would. Well, this has been great. And you know what? You kind of opened it up for a follow-up interview because I want to keep up with what you're going to do, not only what you have done. And you've done an awful lot of stuff, and really look forward to seeing and hearing lots more great music from you. And thanks so much for spending this time with me. I'm sure our audience got a lot out of it.
I hope they did. I'm happy to be here, and I'm so grateful that you reached out and asked, and we found a time to do this. It was lovely chatting with you.
Yes, and I kept you for a long time, so I hope that's okay.
Totally fine. Totally fine. I enjoyed myself. So
Well, so did I.
I
Well,
had fun. I had fun.
me too. Much luck and continued success to you always.
Thanks, John.
You're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, founder and first baseman. If you've ever wanted to learn bass, you should know that right now there are thousands of people inside the For Bass Players Only community. A lot of them in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, men and women. They are learning bass, having the time of their life playing the music that they love. You should come join them and experience that incredible transformation for yourself. You're never too old to groove. I will see you right back here next week, same time, same place. Thanks so much again to my special guest, Harmoni Kelley. I will see you, like I just said, next week, same time, same place. In the meantime, let's play bass.